Good evening. My name is Ramzi Mahmood. I'm the Director of Office of Water Programs. Welcome to this 2016 Spring STEM Scholars Lecture. First of all, I would like to thank Capital Public Radio and the Office of Public Affairs for supporting this important program. Let me tell you something about Office of Water Programs since you're paying attention to me now. Office of Water Programs is the largest self-supported center in the CSU system as a whole, 23 campuses, okay? We have about 40 people. We are, as I said, self-supported. Our training program is the largest training program in the nation, and we provide training materials for operators and managers of water and wastewater treatment, collection systems, and distribution systems. Our research group, which you will hear from today, started about end of 90s, 98, 99, and that's when we started getting funding from Caltrans to look at the stormwater management issues at that time. So it's about more than 15 years we've been doing this, and we developed quite a bit of expertise in stormwater management. At one time, at the beginning, and you'll hear it from the speaker, it was a nuisance. We just want to get rid of it, do something to it, get rid of it. Now we're dealing with it as a resource. So OWP, affectionately as we call Office of Water Programs, has been really a resource for the state and the region for quite a bit of time. Now, Maureen and John will tell you more about stormwater-related program. I want to take a moment to introduce the speakers. Okay, let's see. John Johnston. He gets very nervous when I call him my friend, because he tells me, now what? What are you asking me? So, but he's truly my friend. He started in '97 as a faculty here in civil and environmental. He took a slight detour, went south. I think he missed the exit or something. Went to Fresno State, and then we're lucky have him back here in '97. In '99, he started with the stormwater program, and he has been the technical advisor working on Caltrans and other projects, and he made quite a bit of difference at OWP. He had his doctorate from UC Davis, and he went to the small school south of San Francisco, a place called Palo Alto, Stanford before that. So we're delighted to have John Johnston to talk today. Next speaker is Maureen Kerner. Maureen joined our program in 2006, and I do remember that. I have the spreadsheet, too. She's trying to tell me about the information. So, and we were lucky that she read our job announcement. To our surprise, you know, she walked in the interview, we said, wow, we should hire her, and we're delighted that we hired her. She has bachelor's and master's in civil and environmental from University of Wisconsin-Madison and then Oregon State University. So she has been involved in the stormwater management, monitoring, data collection, design, construction activities, LID, which is low impact development implementation. She also managed the development of phase 2 LID sizing tool. So she did quite a bit, and recently, actually, she and John were instrumental for us to win a grant from EPA to set up Environmental Finance Center for Region 9. So with that, please join me to welcome John and Maureen, the real stormtroopers.
Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's a rainy night, and you've come to hear us talk about rain, so that I really applaud your dedication. In talks like this, they say you ought to start with a joke, right? So I went to the internet and I typed in stormwater humor, and this is what I got. Anybody get it, undergraduates? I don't either. Doesn't make any sense to me, which tells me obviously stormwater is not a laughing matter. And it's not a laughing matter to these folks either. Sorry. These are the folks in Missouri who were inundated by those really big storms a few weeks ago. And I wanted to put this up here because this is not the stormwater we're talking about tonight. I want to make sure that you understand that we are not talking about floods. We are talking about the rainfall that we're getting on an everyday basis. And you'll see why that's important later on. So what I'd like to do is to do the first part of the talk here, talk about kind of the evolution of stormwater management philosophy and thought, and then we'll end with a big case study that Maureen will describe about the stuff that we built on campus. Traditionally, civil engineers have There we go. Traditionally, civil engineers' design philosophy has been to grab the water as it comes out of the sky and move it as quickly as possible away from wherever it lands. So on a street, we'll take the runoff, move it into a gutter, move it into a drain. Here's another gutter, move it into a drain. From the drain, it's going to go into a whole series of pipes, or perhaps ditches, and then from there get discharged to the nearest receiving water, a receiving water being a lake or a stream nearby. In the extreme, the engineers make the receiving water part of the conveyance system. So here's the Los Angeles River, and it kind of looks like a conveyance ditch, doesn't it? In the 1930s, floods were so bad they really needed to move water quicker out of this LA area than the river could carry it, and so they ended up doing this. You might remember this from, I think, the second Terminator movie, where the Governator drives the semi-truck down the path. Here on campus, this is how we get rid of our water. So all the water from the east side of campus comes to a pump station near the Guy West Bridge, and is periodically just pumped out down to the American River. So you get the picture here. Hits the ground, into a pipe, into the river as quickly as you can. That's the part that's changing. While it's moving from where it hits the ground, stormwater is going to pick up a variety of things. So this is a little compendium of the kinds of pollutants that we find in stormwater. If there's extra fertilizers running off somebody's lawn, that will show up in the stormwater. People who overspray their pesticides, or even if they don't overspray, if the rain comes too soon after the spray, it'll wash pesticides into the water. Sediment from erosion, trash, pathogens from your dog or from your goose. I guess those are geese there. You might not, there's been a great proliferation of local ordinances about picking up your dog poop. This is part of the reason for that. And then finally, our beloved cars are the sources of hydrocarbons and heavy metals. We get copper from brakes. We get zinc from the tires. Oops. On campus, the same kinds of things happen. We have a little turbidity plume over here that I caught one day after a rainstorm. This is a hydrocarbon plume. You've seen these little rainbows in the parking lots after a rainstorm. That's a little bit of oil, a little bit of gasoline leaking from the cars. And as a result, the campus stormwater ends up looking like this. So when I took this sample out of that same pipe that I just showed you, I went down to the river, went upstream a little bit, and this is what the American River looked like. You know, it looks pristine, and then we're going to put that in it. Well, I'm not going to. We do put that in it. So what do pollutants do? Well, some of the pollutants are toxic. You know, the hydrocarbons, the pesticides, the metals can be toxic to fish. The nutrients are going to encourage algae blooms. The sediments are going to wreak havoc with local habitat. Trash in the water doesn't look good. And if there are pathogens, beaches close. So in Southern California, after every rainstorm, the guys go out, they measure microbes in the surf, and if they're too high, they close the beaches. We've spent 35, 40 years since the Clean Water Act in the early 70s taking care of wastewater treatment, and we've mostly got that under control. We've mostly got the industrial discharges under control, and now we're at stormwater. And so today, stormwater is described by EPA as one of the leading remaining uncontrolled causes of pollution problems. And our local example here is the fish in the American River. The salmon in the American River need clean gravels to spawn. And so if we put a lot of sediment in the American River and they cover those gravels, the fish can't spawn. Toxins in the water are going to affect the fish, particularly these cute little baby fish are very susceptible to metals and pesticides in the water. At that other university nearby on the other side of the causeway, they have a excess algae problem. If you've ever been to the Arboretum at UC Davis campus, the Arboretum is a long, skinny lake that used to be part of Pewter Creek. It picks up nutrients from the campus, naturally running off in rainstorms, and it spurs huge algae growths here. The ducks have to push the algae out of the way to be able to swim through the water. So engineers, we say, you got dirty water? We know how to handle that. Treatment, we're going to treat it. And so when people started thinking seriously about stormwater quality, they started thinking treatment. And like Dr. Mahmood said, OWP was picked up by Caltrans, said, help us with this problem, help us develop some treatment technologies. And not just us thinking this, but across the country, this is what engineers were thinking. What can we do to treat this? So we developed a bunch of different things. I'll show you a couple examples since it's a Sac State talk. I'm going to talk about the things that we've done. We helped Caltrans work out some trash screens that are designed to capture litter off the highway. This was a particularly interesting one. This is a well screen that's turned on its side. And let's see if the animation works. Yeah. The trash and the water come in, the trash is caught inside, and the water goes out, which is just the exact opposite of how a well screen works in the real world. And right here, it gets pretty grody inside of this thing. They clean it out once a year. And you can get a sense of the size of it here. Up at Lake Tahoe, we spent a lot of time looking at treatment because one of the major contributors to the loss of clarity at Lake Tahoe, in fact, there's an argument, I could say most, and people would mostly agree with me, but a few would argue that there's some algae, but it's mainly small particles running off with the stormwater. From everybody's household, every street running into the lake is hurting the clarity. So we spent some time with Caltrans trying to develop alternative treatment technologies. This is a really highly mechanized one. This looks like a treatment plant, like a water treatment plant. It's got a chemical coagulation tank. We had a couple different filters that we were trying, and then even some ion exchange, reverse osmosis stuff back here. We did a lot of work, and when I say we, I mean us and contractors employed by Caltrans. I don't want to take credit for Dr. Curtis there from the University of Reno. University of Nevada at Reno, did a lot of studies on different media to take out not only the dirt, but also phosphorus, which was thought to be a contributor to algae growth at Tahoe. And you can see up here, it can work pretty well. This sand was so-so. This other media called activated alumina worked really well. We even went so far as to look at chemical treatment. So I know there's a bunch of students in the audience, and we talk about coagulation, flocculation. We looked at coagulation, flocculation as a roadside treatment option. And you can see if you don't put in enough coagulant, nothing happens. This is the control, nothing. And at this end, this is really getting pretty clear. So all we've done is added the chemical, and we mixed it and let it settle. We added a bunch of different chemicals and a bunch of different samples and all different kinds of chemicals. And unfortunately, what we found was every storm is different. Okay, so here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 storms, all with different influent turbidities. Turbidity is the cloudiness of the water. Okay? And in each case, we did a test like this, where it showed that if you add enough, you get a good removal, and if you add too much, you get not so good removal, and not enough, not so good. And in every case, the concentration was different. So if you're thinking about putting something out on the side of the road and just turning it on and walking away, you got to think twice about that, because you need somebody there to see what's going on. Here's a prototype, a chemical addition system. My goodness, there's a flume here, and this was another one, a flume. So you have to measure the water and feed that information to a computer, which is going to turn the speed on a pump so it puts in just the right amount of chemical. It's very kind of a complicated device. Great in a treatment plant, not so good on the side of the road. Filters are not so good on the side of the road either, although they're better than chemical treatment. So this is a prototype filter that was built down in San Diego. And these filters, this is called an Austin sand filter, because it was developed in the city of Austin. It has a settling tank at this end, and then a sand filter at this end. And the settling tank is supposed to take out some of the dirt, some of the pollutants, so that it doesn't prematurely clog the sand side. Keep pressing the wrong button. And here's a little close-up. This is one that's actually in operation, and it's settling on this side, and the water's coming out toward the bottom of this wall. You can see it's watering the plants here, but it's also going into the sand, and it really works reasonably well. The problem is it looks pretty daunting, doesn't it? It's big, concrete, expensive box. We worked hard to try to make them smaller and friendlier. This is one we built outside of Reading. It's a basin now, and instead of a big concrete wall, we just have a low gabion wall. Same idea. And then there's one that we built at Tahoe, where we pretty much had to cut into the side of the hillside to fit this thing in. We developed some pretty good technology, but it was so big that of all of Caltrans' facilities, we could probably had room to put these at only about 10% of Caltrans discharges, which wasn't really going to do the job for them. And then, of course, if there's a treatment requirement and people who can do mechanical equipment, there's a market opportunity. So a bunch of companies develop things that look like this. This is a modular underground filter unit, and it has these canisters or filters. So the water comes in, fills this thing up, and then it goes through these canisters and through the media inside the canisters and out these pipes. Again, works pretty well. It's pretty expensive. This is underground, so it's not a very big footprint, but it's costly. All right, so I've kind of telegraphed to you the issues. In treatment, footprint is a big issue. I mean, think about how many drains there are out in a highway system or in a city. Operational challenges. If every storm is different, you need to have somebody nearby or somebody to control it, and that's difficult because How are you going to hire these people? How are you going to get them out to all these different facilities? How are you going to get them up and running within 10 or 15 or 20 minutes when you know a storm is coming? These things are all expensive too. And then it doesn't even address one of the big problems, which I haven't told you about. So when stormwater hits and runs off and is sent off to the receiving water right away, it doesn't just carry pollutants, it changes the hydrology of the receiving water. So what I'm talking about here is, if you look at an undeveloped piece of land, rain falls on it, these are some just typical numbers from EPA, half the water goes into the ground, 40% of it evapotranspirates, and 10% runs off. We build a city, we put down pavement, we put down buildings with solid roofs, we put down plazas and shopping centers, and now when water hits, very little of it goes into the ground because what we've done is cover the ground with an impervious surface. Most of it runs off, not so many trees, so not so much evapotranspiration anymore. For the receiving water, this is the result. Before development, you've got a hydrograph here, which is the runoff flow as a function of time that climbs very slowly as water infiltrates into the ground and then starts to run off. And then after the storm, it slowly drains away. We replace this with a development, and now the hydrograph looks like this. Bam, right up, bam, right down. Higher flows, faster peaks, faster drawdown, more erosion, more flooding, less infiltration. So that's a problem downstream because you get more of this happening. So streams that have developed based on old flows, nice and even flows, all of a sudden get hit with these big runoffs, and you start developing erosion problems. You also develop problems the following summer. Okay, so here's a little cartoon that says if we have a pervious surface, grass or forest, the water goes in, there's a local groundwater table, and that groundwater exfiltrates into the local streams. So the streams can run during the time after the rainstorm. I mean, in California, it doesn't rain in the summer, right? But you do see streams that are running year-round, and this is where they get their water. If you cover up that infiltration surface, the groundwater starts dropping away, and there's less water going into the streams. So all this hydromodification is a bad news scenario for the fish and the other critters in the receiving waters. So having thought that through, the combination of the hydromodification and the treatment, folks, not just at Sac State, but all over the country, and in fact, all over the world. I recently saw a website from China talking about their Sponge City program, where they want to implement what's called low-impact development. And the strategies of low-impact development are to try to mimic the natural hydrology. So try to get that red line I showed you back to the blue line. We're going to do that by reducing the impervious surfaces, capturing the stormwater near the source, near where it hits the ground, and trying to infiltrate as much as possible. Where we can't infiltrate, we're going to treat it. And where it's too big to treat, we are going to route it away as a flood. So I'm trying to tell you that low-impact development doesn't mean we're going to capture all the water and store it in your front yard until your house is flooded. When the engineers are going to design these things, they're always going to design them for a high-flow bypass. And I'll show you some of these pictures. The reason we can get away with this, or what really makes this work, is the fact that most of rainfall actually falls in relatively small doses. I mean, if I said, what's the average size storm, you would probably come up with a pretty good sized number. But if you take, in this case, 36 years of rainfall in Modesto, and you plot it up so that you've got the cumulative percent of the total rainfall that's smaller than these storm sizes, you get a situation like this where 86% of all of the rainfall falls in storms that are smaller than an inch in 24 hours. An inch in 24 hours is not a flood flow. It's a flow that you can handle with a much smaller facility than a Folsom Dam or a giant storm control basin or flood control basin. And that's what makes us optimistic about LID, because even we're not going to ever try to get these guys, but in here we're going to get 85. We're going to make an attempt to get some kind of treatment on 85% of the runoff. So we've developed a whole bunch of practices, and I won't go through this whole list because I have some pictures to show you of these, but you might have heard, and you will hear Maureen talk about bioretention and rain gardens. You might have heard people talk elsewhere about green roofs or rain barrels and changing out the vegetation. These are all tools in the toolbox for LID. So let me just illustrate a few for you. This is a bioswale. A bioswale is nothing more than a ditch, a vegetated ditch that's allowed to infiltrate. So not only are you getting some treatment from the grass that's in the ditch, you're also losing some of the water to the groundwater, which is what we're trying to do. A rain garden is a depression that we allow to fill up, and then the water will go into an amended soil, so amended so it has lots of infiltration. So it's usually soil and compost and sand mixed together, and then eventually it will drain away. I didn't catch it, but if it's too high, of course, it goes off back into the pipe system. Here's a rain garden that really is a rain garden. Maureen will show you some others today that don't look like somebody's garden. If the soil is not very good at taking up the water, then what we're going to do is we're going to put a pipe down below. And so now we're going to fill it up. We're going to let the water come down through this amended soil, which acts like a filter. It gets caught at the bottom in a storage area and then comes out through an under drain discharge. So this pipe is going to go to the drain system. But now it's gone through 18 inches of soil. So now we're not talking about dirty water, we're talking about much, much improved water quality. And then any water that's left on the bottom here will infiltrate away later between storms. And here's an example of one at a parking lot. You know, the water's coming off the parking lot, fills up. If the storm is too big, it overflows into the drain here. And the underground pipes are attaching to this drain box as well. You could do these on a small scale basis. If you're in the middle of San Francisco, it's going to be tough to build some of these, so you might just do them in terms of planter boxes. Same idea, there's an underground drain and some filter material. Or if you're really pressed for space, you might actually just do it with a single tree. The water comes off, down through the tree, gets caught by the pipe, and off to the drain system. But the difference is it's been treated now through 18 to 24 inches of filter material. Now, we said reduce the porous pavement. What if our pavement, reduce the impermeable surface. So what if our impermeable surfaces actually let the water through? People have developed what's called porous pavement, and of course, concrete pavers. We'll show you a video of this later on. This is great. It looks like popcorn. It holds substantial loads, not high traffic loads, but parking loads, plaza loads, walkways, and water pours right through it. So just to show you, finish up here to show you what these look like on the ground. This was a project in Seattle where they took a regular suburban street. They narrowed it up, so they removed some of the impervious surfaces. They directed the water from the roof and from the street into a series of bioretention basins right along the edge. Notice we've got the depressed area here and all the plants. At the end of the block where the topography comes downhill this way, they put in some check dams So the water comes in, fills up behind, and then infiltrates into the water again. Sorry. You see where we're going here? Capture the water, let it infiltrate. Over in Davis, where I live, so I have examples from Davis because I happen to live there. They don't even bother with the pipes. They just run the water across the surface and into designated areas on the ground. Here's a bioswale. Okay, so bioswale is that conveyance. And here's what it looks like. This is a different one, but here's what it would look like full. Here's a rain garden area. They excavated this out and put in permeable soil. And there's what it looks like full. Actually, these guys are probably, their kids are probably using it for their backyard. 48 hours later, that water is gone. Here's another area. There's a bike path up here, and this is just a space between two streets of houses. Collect the water, let it infiltrate. This is a really interesting one. This is on one side of the street, it looks like this. And on the other side of the street, it looks like this. So they replaced their sidewalks with gravel, and the water runs off. Whoops. I keep going the wrong way. And the water runs off the street, collects in these gravel beds, infiltrates in, and I don't know if you noticed, there's always, always, always a drain for the big flows. You could do this, you don't have to do this in front of your house, you could do this on a neighborhood size basis. So here's a neighborhood scale pond in Davis. If you look really closely, you see houses up here and you see geese here. Here's the same idea up at Tahoe City. This is a stormwater wetlands that collects water from the local highway. So are all the problems solved? Well, I mean, it looks good. No, there's still problems. So there's certainly questions here about treatment efficiency and BMP design details. At Sac State, we just did another project, a Proposition 84 project on engineered soils. And what we did is we built some little baby filters here in a big box. And we put different soil materials in each one. And then we ran stormwater through it. So in a storm, the professor gets to stand underneath here and look at the pumps, but the students stand out in the rain, collect the samples. This is influent. This is the untreated water. Here's the treated water. And what we were looking at is different materials for this brown layer, and we were looking at this white layer. You remember that activated alumina stuff I showed you at Tahoe? It's really good about picking up phosphorus, and that's what we were trying to do. So we were looking at phosphorus reduction, and then we were looking at low elevation outlets versus high elevation outlets, which have an important difference, make an important difference in nitrogen removal. And I won't tell you much about this in the interest of time, but basically, look, there's no AA on these guys, no AA, no removal. And all the ones that have AA, all these others, here's the removal rates, 50, 60, 40%. And on the nitrogen, the bottom drain, here's the let's see, bottom drain, no nitrogen removal, bottom drain, low nitrogen removal, elevated drains, all the removals are higher. So this is the kind of data that we collect that are going to help us refine our designs in the future. The other really big problem, and I'm going to turn it over to Maureen now to tell you about this, is the fact that we've got a whole city here that doesn't have this stuff. And the question is it going to be easy to put in or hard to put in? And that's what we were trying to do here at campus. So let me turn it over.
Thank you, John and Ramsey. Hello. Okay, so we heard about stormwater management, the history of stormwater management. I'm just take a minute or two to talk about, kind of reflect on what we thought and kind of where we're going and the larger picture regionally. So history of stormwater management used to be all about flood management, capturing the water for flood control. Then we went over and realized there are pollutants associated with it. We're going to try to do these treatment devices. They're fairly costly. And then we're moving on to low impact development. Work close to the source, infiltrate, capture the stormwater. That stormwater, when we capture it and infiltrate it, it becomes a resource. We're talking about managing resources, you think sustainability. When I think sustainability, I think of kind of that overall think globally, act locally idea. LID fits really well into that. We're talking about small scale, site scale devices. And so we have a couple of different locations on campus I'll show you about for the Campus LID project that we did. The stormwater on campus goes over to the American River. These facilities are actually pretty small, and there's not very many of them overall. But if you can think of that think globally, act locally. If we're putting this in, it's a demonstration facility, we're having some impact on improving the water quality of the American River, the Sacramento River, about 7 miles downstream, the Sacramento Delta. If you think about everybody else in our region putting that down, it's going to have an even greater impact. And actually, the State Water Board is kind of starting this new approach where different organizations and agencies have to manage stormwater on a watershed scale. So it's bringing everybody together, use stormwater as a resource, and trying to make a bigger impact overall. Okay, so Dr. Johnston told you a little about, and he showed you some of these pictures, a little bit about stormwater on campus. Over on the left here is from a parking lot. You've got sediment and hydrocarbons that are running directly into the storm drains. Before this project, that's pretty much how all stormwater on campus was collected. And that stormwater, at least on the east side of campus, is all brought together and it's discharged here. We had that really cool video we saw earlier, right into the American River. Over on the east side of campus, east side of campus goes to the river, west side of campus goes over to the west ditch, which eventually ties over to the city storm sewer system. Okay, so then once we've collected all the stormwater from campus and it goes out into the out through the outfalls at the Guy West Bridge, comes into the American River. Now, American River is really known for its kind of pristine, beautiful water quality. It's really pretty good overall. Here's a nice, like Dr. Johnston said, a really nice upstream sample, and then during one of our storm events, this is what we're sending out there. Now again, think of that's just us on campus. Think of all the other dischargers up and down river and that impact it's having on the larger scale along the whole river. Okay, so the project I'm going to talk about, I fondly refer to it as the Campus LID project. It came about from a whole lot of collaborators, a lot of support from agencies as well as individuals. Started out, the funding was available from the Prop 84 Stormwater Grant Fund from the State Water Resources Control Board. So they provided the money and the city of Sacramento was awarded the grant. The city of Sacramento just recently released some of its latest low impact development standards throughout the region to be used throughout the region by different developers. And so we collaborated with them to use those standards and do some demonstration on campus for this kind of retrofit scenario that Dr. Johnston just talked about. Retrofit can be expensive, it can be difficult to think about putting and tying it into the existing infrastructure. So Office of Water Programs was fortunate to get to kind of be the hub of the whole project, collaborating from everything of the grant management, project management, working with the city and the state board on that end of things. We also collaborated with the city and facilities management. They're contractors for design and construction oversight and reviews. We have students and our office professionals are working on monitoring and data evaluation to look at the performance. And then we're doing all kinds of education and outreach. So I'll go through kind of each one of those details with you. Overall funding from the project is, again, from the State Water Board. The objectives of these grants, they were available statewide, so they wanted to really have an impact on improving water quality from stormwater discharges. They wanted preventing stormwater contamination of water bodies, meeting stormwater permit requirements, using LID, monitor the performance, and then also educate and outreach to stakeholders in the community. Project total was $3.3 million, 2.6 of which is funded from the grant. And then all those collaborators I mentioned before are provided that local match of about $700,000. The benefits particular for this project are just in line with what the grant wanted. We're protecting, improving the water quality in the American River, meeting permit requirements. The state and the city, county, and campus have stormwater permits and have certain requirements to implement LID in that. We are replenishing groundwater. Campus has 4 wells that they use for, that they tap into the groundwater below and use for irrigation. So we're actually infiltrating, capturing the stormwater, now infiltrating it, replenishing that groundwater, and then we've got it for later use for irrigation. Stormwater as a resource. Engaging the campus community. I'll tell you a little bit later how we have a whole bunch of students working for us, as well as opportunities for folks like yourself to come and hear about the project, to actually walk around campus and see these things in the ground and what they look like, and just in general learn more about stormwater management, as well as an opportunity for professionals and other managers and planners in the area, as well as throughout California, to come and see these things in the ground in Northern California. Okay, so how did we go about figuring out what we wanted to do and what types of BMPs? Dr. Johnston showed you a whole slew of different opportunities, and the campus is pretty big. There's all kinds of opportunities of impervious surfaces, rooftops, parking lots, streets. How do you possibly choose? So we kind of went through, well, okay, what are the biggest goals? What makes the most sense? It was really kind of a bang for the buck approach. Large drainage areas, parking lots, streets, rooftops, and even existing landscapes. Sometimes that turf or the grasses that you see are not as permeable. They can actually be a little tight, and the stormwater is actually just going to run right off them instead of soaking into the ground if you would replace it with different types of land cover or vegetation. Maximize the infiltration, replace that less pervious surface with more pervious surface. Tie into the existing infrastructure. That's the most cost-effective situation, but I'll show you in a little bit, it's pretty difficult. We want to use the existing storm drain system for overflows. Like we were talking about before, we were talking about these smaller storms, right? But there's these bigger storms that you're worried about for flood control. Somehow you're going to have to deal with those. You're not going to be able to design a facility like these that's big enough to handle those big flows. So you want a way for the water to kind of overflow and still get out and over into the river. And we also wanted to make use of the existing irrigation infrastructure as well. But also a big part of this, a lot of times you hear about the soils and how, the physical layout of the facility and that. A big part of this is the smarter vegetation. It's water-wise. You're putting in plants that don't have a lot of water demand, and you're also putting in drought and inundation-tolerant plants. These plants can survive through the really hot, dry summers that we have here in Sacramento. And then when it rains, they're going to have to sit in kind of these depressed landscapes, these gardens, for up to 48 hours and still survive that inundation. Okay, so those are kind of the things that we're looking at. And what we were able to do is go around campus all over and look at all the opportunities to choose from those things I talked about before. And we ended up with a variety of locations throughout campus, so people could, as they're walking maybe over this side, they see something over here, they're going to see other rain gardens. Over in the parking lots and at Jed Smith, you're going to see different things. So one of the other goals was to provide these things throughout campus, as well as have a variety of facility types. A little bit more about site and BMP selection. I'm going to walk you through kind of the typical facilities that we have. So in parking lots, we wanted to capture the runoff from the parking lots because they're such a, they make sense from a bang to the buck. Large catchment areas. Replace the impervious parking stalls with pervious planters. Build planters around the existing DIs so that there's some overflow options. So I went in and just cut the asphalt out, depressed the landscape a little around the existing drainage inlet, and that way the water's going to come from the parking lot. It's going to enter our bioretention planter, and it's going to start ponding up a little bit, and then it's going to, because the inlet is raised, it's going to get up, and if it fills up too much, it's not infiltrating all the way, it's still going to have a means of exit of overflowing into those drain inlets. And then, of course, planting the water-wise vegetation. Over in streets is a similar concept with the water-wise vegetation. We want to do, in this case though, we're looking at curb and gutter. Most streets have a curb and gutter design where the runoff, just follows the parallel with the road and then finds a drain and dumps in. In this case, we had a couple of locations where there were these kind of turf landscapes right up along the curbs. So we were able to cut those curbs and replace the existing soils and landscape with amended soils that Dr. Johnston talked about. They're engineered soils, a mix of sand and compost, specifically designed for treatment and infiltration capabilities. And then, of course, those water-wise plants I talked about. So selecting the BMPs and the sites for rooftops. There's a lot of facilities on campus. We'll have the older buildings that have roof downspouts that are tied directly from the roof down underground into the existing storm sewer system. One of the popular things they talk about is disconnect impervious surfaces. So we're disconnecting the downspouts and we're putting in rain gardens so the water will come out and have an opportunity to infiltrate and be treated in those rain gardens. Also, I've mentioned a couple times, I think now, the existing landscape. Photos are a little hard to see, but here's, I think, over in, I'm not sure if this is Library Green, over by Riverfront Center. There was just a drain that was right in the middle of a big grass patch. The idea here is to dig down in, make a depressed planter, effectively raising that drain, that inlet, and amending the soils to enhance infiltration and putting in some water-wise vegetation. Okay, so lots of challenges. So once we had these kind of concepts of the type of BMP we wanted and where we wanted to put them, how are we actually going to get them in the ground, put the design and specs together? A lot of challenges. Fitting into the existing drainage system horizontally. Over in Lot 6, we were considering putting a rain garden there. And we found that it didn't make a whole lot of sense to do. The existing drain inlets are right in the middle of the traveled way. We'd either have to move the existing drain inlets over into parking stalls, which could be costly, and it doesn't make sense to put a planter in the middle of a traveled way. Over in Lot 10 and Lot 7 more so, it was a lot more, the drain inlets were a lot more conveniently located. You can't see, but the parking stalls run this way. So the inlets all over in Lot 7 are right in the middle of the parking lot. So we were able to negotiate with UTAPs to remove some of those parking stalls and put them in as planters. Conflicts with other infrastructure. So as we were looking around and finding, okay, we have our existing storm drain, which you can't see very well, it's right here. Existing storm drain, existing storm sewer, that would be a great place to put it. There's parking stalls here, but wait a minute, there's a light right here, there's a high pressure gas main right here, a water line that's not showing up, electrical, communications. It's just way too close to get to start dealing with those utilities. So we had to work around, in some cases, abandon initial plans that we had. In other cases, we had to kind of redesign and put in kind of some funky geometry to go around those obstacles. Interactions with buildings. So especially when you're dealing with disconnecting a downspout, you have to be concerned about the impacts you're going to have on foundations. So here, let's see, the downspout is coming here, and we're going to carry it over and place it into a lined planter or rain garden. In this case, we're not letting the soils infiltrate. We don't want them to be coming in and then impacting the building foundation here. A lot of places, like City of Sacramento, require a minimum of a 10-foot separation between the building and the planters themselves. One of the other challenges as we were trying to identify specific locations is that there are some great opportunities, but sometimes the piping, the downspouts are right in the middle of the building, and that can be a little bit of a challenge to access and costly again. Okay, and then probably another one of the big challenges we had was compatibility with the master plan. When we started the initial conceptual ideas and the preliminary designs for this project. Campus master plan was just getting finalized, but at the time there were still kind of 3 different versions out there. And so we wanted to put these bioswales over in lot 1. We were ready to go with that idea, and then we found out they're going to put a parking structure in lot 1. And we wanted to put some other facilities over in I think the southeast part of campus, where they were going to, now they're going to put an event center over there, supposedly. So we had kind of a lot of back and forth working with the long 20-year long-term goal for the campus. Okay, so finally we got through all those hurdles. We had some really good designs. We were real excited about them, and there were construction challenges. My images aren't coming through very well, but even though we talked about having to negotiate around some of those utilities. Utilities are not always where the as-built show they are. So we ended up having to negotiate around those. Sometimes we had to reduce the size of our BMPs. Other times we ended up with kind of funky geometry to move around them. In one case, there was an irrigation line at the very beginning of the project. There was an irrigation line that was much shallower than we anticipated. It broke, found a path of least resistance, and flooded a couple excavations downstream, you'd say. Fortunately, those excavations drained within like 24 hours by the next day, which was really good news for us because it means that our soils are infiltrated really, really well. So it worked out. It's okay. The other challenge with construction, and this is common for almost any one of these LID projects, is that the contractors aren't familiar with the intent. You'll hear a lot of stories from engineers and planners working with contractors of how inlets that are designed on the plans to be raised, contractors see that, they're not familiar with the true intent, and they think it's a mistake, so they actually make it flush. And so the stormwater comes into these rain gardens and planters and just goes right down into the drain without any kind of treatment and no chance for promoting infiltration. You want to keep heavy equipment off of the excavations. The intent is infiltration. You want to keep the soils porous and open. And if you're going to put a big heavy equipment on there, you're going to end up compacting the soils and reducing the infiltration capabilities. You also want to be making sure the contractors are using the soils that are spec'd. These are engineered soils. There's all kinds of studies that have been done. There are more that need to be done about the mix of sand and compost for removing pollutants, for the filtering and adsorption properties. Contractors don't understand that what we said is what we really want. So a lot of times in this project, there were a lot of requests for substitutions of those materials. Okay, so now I wanted to show you some construction photos and talk a little bit more about construction. It's a $3.3 million project, a lot of money, and not a whole lot of facilities if you think about it. And just wanted to show you how much really goes into these facilities. It's not just a matter of what you're seeing on the surface. So for example, over in, I think this is lot 7, we started out with a great big parking lot, had to come in and saw cut and start excavating those soils out. Had to build forms around to put in a concrete wall. The wall goes about 3 feet below grade, so that helps to provide structure for when a vehicle comes over and is going to park right next to this planter. There's going to be support in that the soil underneath isn't going to just cave into the rain garden below. So here's a picture of the formed concrete, and they've started filling it in and putting in, I think those are some of the irrigation lines. And then we're starting to plant a whole lot of different plants going in. Over on Jed Smith, we created a green street. It's comprised of porous pavement and rain gardens. So we went in, again, had to do some saw cutting. On either side, we removed the existing asphalt and put in porous pavement. They're putting in forms here for pouring concrete to support the existing rain gardens and some of the porous pavement areas. That's just some more of the forming and excavations, and then finally a whole lot of planting again. Calaveras Hall, over where we were capturing roof runoff. Let's see where I have this one is an example of the roof drain coming in. The contractor cut it off, and then this is where it had initially tied into the storm sewer. below, so you're capping that off, and then we're putting rain gardens in here. Here's an example on the back side of Calveras where we've put in a valley gutter, so the roof, now that it's disconnected, the downspouts directing the stormwater into that valley gutter. This eventually gets filled up with those engineered soils for infiltration and then the planting. And then over on the other side of Calveras Hall, this is where the facility, the rain garden was right next to the building. We couldn't get that 10-foot setback, so we ended up completely lining the facility and putting in one of these kind of concrete boxes. And so it's really, instead of infiltrating, it's really more of a filter type device. Over on Library Green and Campus Grove, Campus Grove is the term I came up with. It's over at the Riverfront Center. We have those raised inlets with the rain gardens, and we also have a nice porous pavement strip along one of the walkways that replaced decomposed granite. So initially, it was just kind of a turf area, started doing some excavations, started forming around, had to do a little bit of cutting around the existing inlets, putting in some new piping for underdrain as a kind of a fail-safe in case our facilities don't completely infiltrate and we start having more like ponding up on the surface. We have valves in here that we can turn on, and then this is a perforated pipe that'll carry that water out to the storm drain, to the drain inlet through the storm drain. Formed and filled, and then with our, started planting and the porous pavement. College Town Drive, this is where we're capturing street runoff. So there's conventional curb and gutter and some turf landscaping along there. I really like this one because it's kind of the simplest thing that you can possibly do, and there's so many opportunities for it everywhere. All you do is you cut your curb out, you put in some amended soils, and then you plant it with some water-wise vegetation. Okay, so plants. The landscaper on this had a whole lot of opportunities for showcasing a variety of plants and a combination of those plants at all the different locations throughout campus. They chose all kinds of, it just planted in fall, but pretty soon, there's a couple of these flowers that are starting to come up as a few weeks ago. A whole bunch of different flowering type shrubs. There's grasses. There's different heights, different colors of the greens, the flowers. They also put them in the kind of these neat designs where there almost looks like as they fill in more, it'll look kind of, you'll actually be able to kind of see some wave patterns representing water flow. We do have a list of these plants available. They're on our website, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Okay, so you plan, you design, you build, and then you need to maintain. Very, very similar maintenance requirements to traditional landscaping. Remove weeds, litter, and debris. You don't want debris to be getting in. We had a lot of leaf litter this year, filling up, and you don't want it to be covering your drain inlet in case you do have overflows that you need to pass through. Integrated pest management techniques. We don't want to be introducing fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides. We don't want to get those into the American River. So it's really a lot of hand weeding and inspections and observations and prevention. Inspect for erosion and sediment issues, and then fix those issues if they're identified. Inspect for infiltration. Want to make sure that these soils are pulling the water down within 48 hours. They were designed to do so. If the water ponds for, say, 48 to 72 hours, you have vector issues, those are like mosquito breeding problems. And so we're going to be watching them. So far, so good for most of the facilities. I'll tell you about the one in a second. Replace, and then long-term, 10 to 20 years, we are looking at probably having to replace the soils. There's a lot of different studies out that show somewhere between a lifespan of 10 to 20 years, but we'll continually, again, watching that infiltration capability to see how they're performing and then replace the soils as needed. Okay, so how are they doing now? We've had a bunch of rain. They're performing as designed. Good news, first biggest step is that the runoff is actually entering the facilities. That's great. We are having temporary ponding. all of the facilities except one are infiltrating within 48 hours. There's one over on Collegetown Drive, one of those simple rain gardens I talked about. It's kind of interesting when you look at the soil survey, National Soil Survey results. There's kind of this perfect line that goes right along that rain garden that shows really tight clays at that rain garden, where everywhere else on campus it's kind of these nicer, open, sandy soils. So that one we're working with facilities management to mitigate. And then we've actually had minimum overflow and discharge. We haven't had really these big flood flows yet, or larger storms yet. So, the storms that have been designed is what we've had so far. They're the storms that we designed for, the storms that we've had so far. So most of that water is infiltrating. And actually, I'm going to show you an example of the porous pavement. I haven't talked about that very much, so I haven't talked about the porous pavement very much, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of see it in action. Okay, so how are they really performing? What are the numbers? We're working on that right now. We have students that are helping us, civil engineering students who work for OWP in a variety of projects that we have. They're assisting with flow measurement and analyzing the water quality. We're looking in particular at different sediments, pesticides, and metals. Those are the pollutants of concern for the American River. And then the students are also going to be helping with data evaluation and reporting. And our students really get into their work. I thought you would like that one. Okay, so we have a lot of education and outreach opportunities, and we've done a lot, and we have a lot more to do. We want that we're going to do. So you guys continue to learn about what we're doing, what's the latest in stormwater management, and even more about these facilities. We have, for instance, I have my computer science students represent in the house, and they are working on a mobile app for a self-guided walking tour, so you can walk around on campus. It'll guide you from one BMP to the other. It'll tell you a little bit about the design, some of the schematics and pictures, what it looks like, what the plants were used at the different locations. We have, we are working on signs right now. You might have seen we had some smaller 2x3 or so, I think, signs that were at the different BMPs. We're going to put in some of these really nice kind of wood signs that are 3x4 size with a lot more detail, schematics, plant types, where you are on campus, a little bit narrative of what the BMP is about. Opportunities like this, the STEM lecture, we're doing different conferences, professional conferences throughout the state. We held a regional conference on low impact development over at the Alumni Center back in November, and we actually gave a whole lot of professionals opportunities to have a tour and actually see these things in the ground. We currently have a website that focuses a little more on kind of the construction activities that happen during the summer and the fall. We have their STEM video we just linked that they put together. It's really, really well done, STEM, thank you. And then we're going to be beefing this up to include some of the design plans, the plant types, performance monitoring data. So I hope you can come back and check us out soon, probably in a couple months. We're also working a lot with public affairs to get the news out regionally and to the Sacramento community. So all kinds of newspaper articles. We did a Cat Public Radio interview, a Fox News interview. So all kinds of activities going on. More LID is coming to campus. Campus now has just been pulled into, they call it this phase 2. It's a stormwater permit for small municipal separate storm sewer systems. Campus has requirements now to implement LID if a project is of a certain size. It's also being incorporated into the master plan. This green line here that you see is a swale that's going to run right through campus. It's going to tie in, it's a LID feature itself, but I imagine you're going to see a whole lot of these other LID features around the different buildings that come into play. Okay, just kind of rounding things out, talking again about think globally, act locally, managing stormwater for tomorrow's generation in the spirit of sustainability. LID is a site scale approach, so you have the opportunity to implement some of these things at home. Sacramento has a great website. It's a cooperation of the City of Sacramento, the County of Sacramento, City of Elk Grove, City of Folsom, City of Galt, beriverfriendly.net. They've got all kinds of information about river-friendly landscaping and being water smart, reducing water use. And if this works, here's our website where you can learn more about the project and keep hopefully in a few months we'll have more information. And I have a slideshow of the finished product. So that one really is more, the problem is okay. So the question was when I was talking about the one rain garden on Collegetown Drive, and there's kind of that clay layer that's preventing infiltration. The question was, how much amended soil are you gonna have to put in to alleviate the situation? What we'd have to do is go in and bore and see how deep that clay layer is. It could be several feet deep. One option that's happening a lot these days is a big hot idea, especially for the Sacramento area where we have these really tight soils. For this project, we're really close to the American River. We have nice alluvial soils and sands, so we're getting a lot of infiltration. A lot of the whole other area, there's just not that this opportunity in the native soils for infiltrating. So we don't know, but what they are talking about is something called dry wells, where you essentially just bore down through that confining layer and then introduce the stormwater that until you hit a gravel layer or something where that would take the stormwater. Right here.
How adaptive are the projects that you're working on to future retrofitting? Like, is future changes included in the development?
You mean future changes on campus?
Yeah, I mean, the technology advancing and, different methods.
That's kind of the neat thing about, oh, sorry, repeat the question. The question is, with technology advancing and new information coming out, how adaptable are these facilities? And the neat thing about it is really simple, really pretty simple. There's, some infrastructure that goes into it, but it's not relying on pumps or electronic systems or things like that are really advancing. Probably the biggest one that might change is as more studies are moving forward on these engineered soils and the appropriate mix of sand and compost or whatever other media might be most appropriate for the different stormwater pollutants that are coming through. That's probably the biggest one.
Actually, I think the other thing that's going to happen here is we redevelop older facilities. We're actually just going to change the nature of the landscape or of the neighborhood. So instead of starting with streets and sidewalks and a little bit of grass and then a building, I expect that architects and landscape architects will come at this differently and say, oh, here's where the water's going to go, and then the car's going to go over there, and then we'll find a way to get people through these facilities. So I think the whole picture will change in the future. So the question was, some communities may have a centralized stormwater collection system and then reuse that water for landscape irrigation, park irrigation, that kind of thing. Actually, that doesn't happen very often. And the follow-up was, is there any treatment? So where you're seeing in parks people irrigating, they say non-potable water, in other words, not tap water, that's usually reclaimed wastewater. Stormwater may be collected, but for irrigation purposes, you have to store it. You have to store it from December until the irrigation system. Most communities don't have that kind of facility, so that's not really very common. Now, if they were to divert it into something like a wetlands or like those big ponds I showed you, we use it the way it is because it's doing the same thing we're talking about locally, just in a more centralized place.
That overflow pipe, that's the existing drain. Oh, question. So the question was, what kind of filtration does the stormwater go through if it overflows and goes into the drain inlet? And the answer is none. So if it's overflowing, it's just going right into the drain inlet that connects directly to the storm sewer system.
Yeah, in fact, if you go to your neighborhood and look at the storm drains, you should see little medallions or stencils that say, draining directly to the river. Don't pour your old oil here. Don't pour your wastewater here. That's the issue, is that there is no treatment.
So the question was, I remembered to repeat the question this time. The question was, what's the efficiency of the amended soils? And particularly in some cases when typically you'd use 24 inches, that's kind of the ideal number, but we didn't quite maybe have the depth. If we're tying into the existing drainage system, we didn't quite have the depth to achieve that full 24 inches and had to go down to 20 inches or so. Is that appropriate? Yeah. Okay, so the addition to the question is, a lot of times bioswales are designed to be a certain depth, or a certain length for sedimentation and filtration through the vegetation. You're saying if you're talking about infiltrating in more of a depth unit, what's the efficiency there? And so that's a really great question. So traditionally, bioswales are designed really for more surface treatment, sedimentation, flowing through the vegetation, through the ditch, and the pollutants, particularly sediment, is dropping out or getting filtered through the vegetation. In this case, we kind of are calling them really more an infiltrating bioswale, and they were designed more for infiltrating than for surface flow. So the efficiencies for the amended soils are for sediments and for metals in particular can be up to 90%. It's definitely site specific. They're very, environmental data is extremely variable. It depends on the stormwater quality that you're starting out with. But we're anticipating to see quite a bit, like in the higher 80s or 90s% removals for pollutants.
Yeah, and I think I'll point out that bioswales are probably the least efficient of anything that we talked about up here. The stuff that we did for the engineered soils project, we got non-detects on most of the metals, on the exotic organics we put in. The nutrients, with the activated alumina, we got very good phosphorus removal, not so good nitrogen removal, and then turbidity and solids are removed very well in the bioretention systems. So does implementing low-impact development drive up costs? Only in a very minor way. I mean, what we did is we took, in several of our facilities, we took an existing piece of lawn and put different plants in it. If you're doing this from scratch, you're not even digging anything out very much that's different. You're still grading, you just grade it differently. So in terms of cost, it's really quite a minimal cost. And in the long run, since you've got the water-wise plants that are drought tolerant, and you're not out there mowing a piece of lawn every week all year round, you're actually going to save money. Folks at UC Davis have been working on the economics of this, and they found that it really wasn't the cost of the water that was the maintenance cost in these lawns. It was the mowing them every week that was running up the bills. And so they're in a major retrofit of that campus. If you go over there, say on picnic day, you'll see a lot of places where there used to be lawns or decorative bushes. Now they've been replanted in California natives, and it looks very nice, but it's going to save them a handful of money. So Caltrans took, how does porous concrete stand up under traffic loads, basically? And it is not a good material. It's not structure sound enough for big rigs or for buses moving at speed. But for parking, it seems to be just fine. So, I mean, when you've got a big moving mass, you impart a lot of extra force onto the surface, and it can't handle that. What happens is that it starts to break up, right? It doesn't collapse, but it starts to crumble at the surface. So I think in terms of use, parking uses, even for big vehicles, I think are all right, and and obviously for any bicycle or pedestrian.
There's also something called porous overlays that they do use on roads with heavy vehicle. There's actually a really cool video out of Texas where you're driving along on conventional highway, conventional concrete, and then all of a sudden you hit this porous overlay.
I remember that.
Oh yeah. So you hit this porous overlay, and all of a sudden there's no splash on your windshield at all. And what it is, it's maybe like 1 or 2 inches of this porous asphalt or concrete. The stormwater infiltrates or passes through, and then hits kind of a more impermeable barrier below, and then comes off and falls into the adjacent landscape on the side. So they do use it on highways and stuff for heavier loads, but it's very different looking than what we have here. And it doesn't, promote full infiltration down into the native soils below. You don't really want to do that anyways, because you want to make sure that your subbase for your roads are, is strong.
The asphalt one?
I'm sorry. What's the lifespan of the porous overlay? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah.
I understand that you're saying that a lot of this type of work is really taking the place of existing landscape as part of the footprint of the overall area. But have you calculated what percentage of the footprint of your master plan will be required to handle all the water on what percentage of it?
So what percentage of the master plan, how large would these facilities need to be in order to cover the for the master plan? No, we have not been involved in the master plan itself, so we don't know that number.
But the typical rule of thumb for an urban area and bioretention is 5% of the total of the impervious area. 4%. Okay, 4%. One more question? I think somebody had, yeah.
I don't know roughly, but
question?
the question is how much more expensive is porous concrete than conventional concrete? I don't know, except that it is quite costly.
You want to think twice about your uses, yeah. It's not going to replace regular concrete all the time. Well, thank you very much for coming this evening.